So we are in this 3-week series on our identity, our purpose. I'm trying to not use the word vision, but it's hard to avoid. It's like, what's that game you play where you have to describe the word without using it, you know? So I'm trying to describe the vision of the church without using the word vision, which is often quite loaded with all kinds of baggage. But that's basically what we're talking about. And it comes down to 3 things: loving God, loving each other, loving the world. We talked a couple of weeks ago about loving God, and we described ourselves as a word-centered church, and we described ourselves as a worshipping church. Last week we talked about loving each other, and we looked into the idea of koinonia. We've been in this passage in Acts 2. We talked about koinonia, or fellowship, or participation in each other's lives, and what it means to be a generous church, what it means to be an hospitable church, what it means to be an inclusive church. And we did this crazy social experiment last week, those of you who were here. And the feedback has been interesting. And I particularly appreciate those of you who I know are strongly introverted and really struggled with what we did last week. If you weren't here, we had, 5-8 minutes in the service where we just interacted. And I know for some of you, you literally had heart palpitations at that point, but you stuck with it, and good on you. It's not easy for everyone, but it is important, and it's just part of this culture we're trying to create. So, that was interesting, and this morning we're going to tackle the last part of this threefold idea, loving the world. So let's set the scene again. We're going to read the same passage we've been in each week, Acts 2, this picture of the very first community of Jesus people in Jerusalem. A few thousand of them spread among various houses, but here they are. Well, let's just remind ourselves of the flavour of this, and then we'll talk about how they love the world. Acts 2, verse 42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. For the last few years, each December, I've spoken down at a sports camp for teenagers down in Totara Springs Christian Centre in Matamata. Even though I'm completely unsporty for some reason, I've gone down there, and it's been a lot of fun. The last 2 years, our church has also taken a band down, which has been great. And these guys, Phil and Ryan and Grant, these guys like to crank up the volume, and it's all rock and roll, and the teenagers are bouncing up and down, and it's crazy. It's good fun. And it means that because I'm not particularly athletic, and because Shaw didn't have a sports team in these camps, at least last year, most of the day we had free. And so we would just kind of muck around this huge big camp at Totara Springs. We jumped in these big tube tyres and floated down the stream. We played with these water balloons. We became kids again. It was fantastic. And we came across this little playground, which I'm sure was for kids under 12. But we jumped on it. It was like we all just became little schoolboys and girls, and we were, sliding down this slide and jumping on this hammock and just being completely stupid. And the best part of this playground was in the centre of it, there was one of those old school playground roundabouts. Do you remember them? And you're trying to jump on this thing, you push it, you grab on and run as hard as you can, and then you jump on, and someone else is still running and pushing, and you're just holding on and leaning back and just getting all the G-forces pushing you. You remember this, right? You've been there. And it's just great fun, and you try to turn around and you try to dance around and just be completely stupid, and then you'll have a turn running, and someone else is just being shoved off the side of this thing. It's fantastic. I mean, I don't know what anyone else thought walking past. This is supposed to be the camp speaker in the band, and there's just no sense of decorum at all. But it was great fun. Now, there is a tenuous illustration here that I want to try and make, and it is tenuous, okay? But just try and stay with me here. What I want to argue is this. The whole idea of this roundabout, and I don't know much about physics, but that force is called a centrifugal force, right? This outward force from the centre outward. I want to argue that this church that we see in Acts 2 had a centrifugal force to it. All right, you see what I mean? Not literally, or else that would look funny, but metaphorically. that there was in this community, and in any healthy biblical community, a sense of outward propulsion. That they weren't just there for one another, and they weren't just there to worship God. But as things got spinning, there was this irresistible movement outward. And they really existed for the sake of the world. And they were moved from their gatherings to the world, to outsiders, people far from God, people far from church, people who would never enter their gatherings, but they were moved with love and grace and service and gospel proclamation towards their world. This is what characterized the church, and it was absolutely central. This is the idea of loving the world, that in a healthy church we are pushed out. And when that doesn't happen in a church, it inevitably becomes insular and it dies, because there is no life coming in, and there is no sense of mission, and there is very little sense of purpose. And I would say that this is what gives a lot of what we've been talking about its meaning and its value. Even when we talk about loving each other, that's not just for the sake of it, but we love each other for the sake of the world. Ultimately, we love each other for the sake of the lost. And it's not just about church picnics and church potlucks that bring people together. It's being united in a common mission. That's actually what creates, I think, the greatest sense of internal community, is that we have a sense that we are on this mission together, that we are brothers and sisters in arms, as it were. And we are here because we are united in a cause that's bigger than ourselves. That's what pulls us together, like soldiers on a battlefield. The camaraderie is established by virtue of the fact that we're fighting a common enemy. So loving the world is absolutely central. And I know that as we've worked through these three ideas, loving God, loving each other, loving the world, and I know from conversations with some of you, different people respond to each of these three things in different ways. And some people are all about the loving God stuff. For some people, church is, the worship is really where it's at, to create these contexts where we're worshiping. For others, it's all about the loving each other. And we just have to be absolutely committed to that. And then others, it's nothing if it's not evangelism. It's nothing if it's not loving the world. I think all of that's great, but you have to hold all three together. I don't think you can elevate any one of them. It's a three-legged stool. You can't rip one leg out, or else the stool's going to crash. They're all absolutely essential. And so we have to really figure out, what does this loving the world thing look like? What does it mean for us as a community to have a centrifugal force and to be pushed outward? There's a couple of things in this passage. Let me make some observations. The very last phrase in verse 47, the very last sentence, have a look at this. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. It's this intriguing sentence that just implies a lot of what's happening, even though you don't know how exactly that worked. But what it says, what's interesting is that it says daily. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't say the Lord added to their number weekly at a worship service, those who were being saved. It doesn't say the Lord added to their number at a Billy Graham rally once a year. It's daily. So what I take out of this is that the members of this community must have been active on a daily basis as they went about their lives, their stuff, their work, their family life, their social life. They were active in taking this message about